Even the best programmers make mistakes when they write a new VBA code module. What sets the great coders apart from the good ones is the ability to detect and fix problems in their subroutines and functions. Excel VBA provides several different tools you can use to discover and fix any errors you encounter. In this movie, I'll discuss how you can manage error handling by using on-error statements. To do that, I'll press Alt F11 to go over to my code module. In this subroutine, I have the user input a number from an input box, asking them to enter a number. I then calculate that number plus 3 and display a message box with the result of that calculation. The point of this exercise is to show you what happens if the user doesn't enter a number. So I will press F5 to run the code, and I get my input number box. If I type the letter G instead of a number and press enter, I get a type mismatch. That means that I entered some sort of a character string instead of a number, or it could have been anything else. I will click End to dismiss the dialog box. By default, Excel displays that sort of error box whenever there's an error in the code. That mode is called onError go to 0. In other words, it goes to line 0, which is simply a shorthand for it to display its normal error boxes. If I were to make the line of code onError go to 0 active and make the same mistake, running the code and then typing the letter G instead of a number and pressing enter, I get the same type mismatch error. In general, you only want to use onError go to 0 when you want to shift from another error handling mode to the default method. So what are those other two modes? Well, the first is onError go to and then a line label followed by a colon. And that I have written here in the first line. When I remove the comment, we're now handling errors by sending all of the errors to a line in the code. That line is called handler. And you see here at the bottom of the subroutine, I have a line called handler followed by a colon. And within that, I have a message box that says that's not a number. So let's see what happens if I run the code again, pressing F5, type the letter G instead of a number, and press enter. The VBA code detects the error. Because my error handling mode, in case of error, sends the program to the line labeled handler, it displays the message box that is in that code. So if I click OK to dismiss the box, again, onError go to handler, here is the handler code, and the message box, that's not a number, which you saw before, and then you go to the end of the subroutine. Now you might have noticed that I have exit sub up here. Exit sub tells Excel to exit the subroutine before the handler line is reached. So let me show you what could happen if I comment out that line of code and then enter an actual number. If I press F5 to run the code, I enter a number and I enter the number 5, which is correct, and press enter. Excel displays the number 8, but then it says that's not a number. That's why you have to have the exit sub statement before you have your error handling. If you had multiple error handling routines, such as handler 1 and handler 2, that's a string. I won't build any code to send it down here, but just assume that there was another line that would send it to here. If you don't want Excel to run all of these lines of code, then you need to type exit sub. That way, if the routine runs correctly, we exit here. If we get sent to handler 1, the routine exits here. And if we get sent to handler 2, then we're at the end of the subroutine and it would exit normally. There is one other error handling mode, and that is onError resume next. So if I comment out the goto handler and make onError resume next active, then we are now in onError resume next mode. OnError resume next is the easiest way to handle errors in VBA, but it's also the least helpful. Why is that? Because it just ignores the problem. It skips the line of code that generated the error and tries to continue. What's worse, you could have multiple errors and you'd have no idea they occurred until you examine the subroutine's output. So let's see what happens when I have onError resume next and I enter a letter into the input box that's expecting a number. If I type G and click OK, or press enter in this case, I get the number 3. That means that because G was not a number, it treated it as 0 and said OK, but it accepted the input that was obviously incorrect. And that is why using onError resume next isn't the best method for handling errors. I rarely use onError resume next and never use it while I'm still working on my code. Before I release a macro-enabled workbook to my end users, I determine the most common ways a user could cause an error and create error handling routines for those circumstances. My users almost always find new ways to use the workbook incorrectly, so I add additional error handling code as required.